This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
We welcome you to this June 21st edition of Real Talk. It's Jesperson here with the intrepid and talented John Hicks, the technical producer of the show. Coming up in just a minute, he's a tech critic, he's a podcaster, he's an author. He is arguably Elon Musk's biggest critic, or maybe the biggest cynic over the CEO's plan, the Twitter CEO's plan via self-driving cars and rocket ships to space, on how those will transform society, transform humankind or not. Paris Marx joining us in just a second. In about a half an hour's time, we're going to be taking a look back 10 years ago today. The city of Calgary and surrounding communities absolutely decimated by floodwaters. Who will ever forget the southern Alberta floods of 2013? We'll talk to two disaster researchers from Mount Royal University that have been digging into how those floods shaped Calgary and southern Alberta as a community. It's summer solstice tonight, and it is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and we will recognize that with our friends out in Jasper today as well. There's actually an event going on today. If you find yourself on your way out to Jasper National Park or anywhere near, we have the details coming up in this episode of Real Talk. Before we get to Paris Marx, we wanted to get the word out. You know, it's officially the first day of summer, and the kids are wrapping up the school year, and things are, we hope for you, winding down at work. Now, a lot of us have vacation on the brain. Not John. John's always working.
Oh, yeah.
He's always working. But for those of you that do, you know, honestly, you get it, right? You relate. You've got bigger things on your mind than maybe just where you'll kick up your feet or how you'll get that sand between your toes. You know that summer is the best time to take that real estate course you've been thinking about and get started on a career that you actually love. Why not leave cubicle life behind for good with Rello? Rello's online real estate courses are fully accredited to help you get your real estate license in our home province of Alberta, and they've just added a commercial real estate course to their offerings. More courses coming soon as well. You can get licensed the easy way with Rello's convenient, self-paced courses. You can check out rello.ca, that's RELO.ca today to get started. Well, what role will tech play in shaping our communities? What role will tech play in dictating or at least enticing us to imagine what our future could look like? Simply put, will tech save us? Our leadoff guest this morning doesn't think so. As a matter of fact, Paris Marx is a New York Times recommended podcaster with the popular pod Tech Won't Save Us. Also the author of Road to Nowhere, What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About Transportation, making their Real Talk debut. It's a real pleasure to welcome Paris Marx. Thanks for making time for us, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Ryan. Great to join you.
Why won't tech save us? I mean, how did this become something that occurred to you that you realized this is something you could build a whole show around?
Well, you know, I think everyone gets a little excited about the tech industry. And certainly we've seen, you know, over the past 10 or 15 years, a lot of excitement about, you know, what tech was delivering to us. You know, a lot of people excited about Elon Musk and his big visions of the future and all those sorts of things. And I think that one thing that really became clear to me, you know, as I've been watching this industry and writing about this industry for quite a number of years now, is that, you know, especially around kind of the mid 2010s, you know, 2016, 2018, around that period, it felt like there started to be a bit of a reassessment, right? We had all this excitement around, you know, companies like Google or, you know, Facebook, even. People, you know, remember when people used to like Facebook and didn't actually hate it like many people do now. You know, and there was a bit of a reassessment to say, okay, what is the impact that these companies are actually having in our lives? Are they actually delivering on the promises that they made to us, you know, in the past? Are they really improving society in the way that they promised? Or do we need to start to think about like, okay, yeah, they have, certainly changed many aspects of our society, certainly done many things, certainly some services are more convenient because they've rolled out, but, is everything positive? And do we need to start to pay attention to actually the negative impacts that they're having as well? And that's kind of what I explore in the show with different guests every week.
So it's sort of more just a, hey, everybody, let's pump the brakes. Although I guess maybe that metaphor actually kind of works if we're talking about self-driving cars in the future of transportation, which you and I will. More of a, let's take a measured approach to new tech. I mean, we're checking out your Twitter. People can follow you at Paris Marx. And you were poking a little fun at these new Apple Vision Pro headsets. We were talking about them. We like to say them in Canadian dollars, $4,700. These headsets that are going to be made available, I guess, about a year from now. Some people are saying that they will change the entire way that people interact with tech, but you don't seem sold on them.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical. Price tag, first of all, of course. But I'm sure at some point they will have like a more affordable version. But I think the bigger question for me is like the tech companies have really been trying to sell us on headsets for a number of years now, right? A few years ago, Meta, formerly Facebook, was trying to sell us on the metaverse and this idea that we were all going to be wearing like VR headsets and going into this virtual world. But before that, Microsoft had its headsets. PlayStation has obviously put out VR headsets in the past and continues to. This is really like a long running thing that the tech industry has been trying to convince us like will be the future for a long time now, and people don't really seem to be buying it. So of course, Apple will approach this, with a more sleek headset. Certainly they put probably a bit more work into it than some of the other ones. I hope so for that kind of price tag. But I'm very skeptical that people are going to say, how I want to deal with my computers or talk to people in the future by strapping this like heavy thing onto my face, right. Which makes it difficult to like look at everyone around me and communicate with people around me. I don't think that's the future.
Yeah, I was just in an airport that nothing that I'm about to offer is profound or even unique. I know that everybody has this experience, but I'm walking through an airport terminal on Sunday night, and I looked around and literally every single person is looking at a screen, at their phone, at their tablets, at their laptops. But it was a sea of, I would say, 200 people waiting to board a flight. And I found myself, I'm not a Luddite. I embrace tech. I'm probably like a middle of the road type person when you look at society writ large. But I thought, gosh, back in the day, like 25 years ago, people, either perfect strangers, and for some it would be a nightmare, and for others, new friends, would be talking and interacting. Some would be reading a book, some would be reading a newspaper, some would be talking to their kids. But literally every single person was staring at a screen. And I don't know, it kind of hit me for a second, before I looked back to my own screen on my way to the baggage claim, it's just
Absolutely.
It's crazy how it's happened.
Yeah, totally. It brings to mind a friend of mine, Brian Merchant. He's the tech columnist at the LA Times, and he wrote a piece about this kind of Apple Vision Pro, last week, I guess, or something like that. And he kind of said, we're already kind of uncomfortable with the degree to which we're all looking at our smartphones and dependent on our smartphones. And is what we want now to like strap our smartphones to our face and like be more immersed in our smartphones. Like, I don't think that's the future that most people want, but it's certainly the one that a lot of these tech companies would like us to desire.
Let's talk a little bit about your book, and why don't we talk about the future of transportation and city building? I should let people know, and people will be interested, that you're going to be actually delivering a speech in Edmonton, and people will be able to listen. People can check it out. A city councilor, I believe, is hosting you, if I'm getting this correct. People can check out michaeljans.ca. They can find the information in our show notes if they want to learn more about this talk that you'll be giving. But obviously, you've paid a lot of attention to how cities are built, how cities are designed, the kind of the ethos behind that. Edmonton, it's a wonderful city. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Edmonton, but it has a bit of a reputation as a bit of a car city. There's a huge controversy around bike lanes. I'm sure you're aware. If not, you're going to hear a lot about it in a couple of days. What sort of zoomed out are you paying close attention to when taking a look at how we build our communities, how we build our cities, and how transportation and tech fits into that?
Absolutely. It's a huge topic, right? Especially because we all have to get around every single day. And I don't think Edmonton is the only city in Canada that is kind of a car city, right? Many of our cities have been designed in that way, or just communities in general. It doesn't have to be a big city. I think that for me, like I look back at the history of transportation and where this all came from, and I think we have this idea that like the car was this inevitable thing that was just, of course, going to happen. But when I look back on it, like it was a very political thing that happened, right? You had a lot of commercial interests that were pushing it and governments that wanted this to be the way that we got around, and they made investments that were targeted at getting us to drive cars. And now when I kind of fast forward to what has been going on in the past 10 or 15 years, I think that people have recognized that, there are a lot of issues that have arisen because of our dependence on cars. The amount of time we spend stuck in traffic, the amount of people who die on our roads, of course, the emissions that come from our vehicles and that are contributing to climate change right now. And so I think that a lot of people recognize that something kind of has to change here, and we're not 100% sure what. And the tech industry kind of saw that, this was kind of a collective conversation that was beginning to happen. And they moved in and said, actually, we don't need to reconsider, what the core of our transportation system is. All we need is some new technologies to go in there, some self-driving cars, some ride-hailing services, maybe some hyperloops, things like that. And that will solve the problem, right? We don't need to have difficult political conversations. We can just rely on new tech, and that will fix everything. And I think what we've seen after that 10 or 15 years of promises that we've been looking at is the self-driving cars haven't really arrived. The Hyperloop is nowhere, closer to being realized than it was 10 years ago. A lot of these big promises have not really paid off, have not delivered the benefits, but we're still dealing with these serious issues in our transport system. And so the question is, how are we really going to address that in the future? Are we going to keep hoping that the tech industry delivers magical solutions, or are we going to start having some difficult political conversations as to, how we maybe change our focus on how we prioritize transportation?
What do you think that the average, I'd be curious to know the statistics. I don't know if you do or not on what average vehicle ownership looks like across the country. Do you happen to have a number or know what the, how many vehicles the average person owns? Is it more than one vehicle per person?
I wouldn't know the exact numbers on that, but like Canada is a very car dependent society. It doesn't, just have to be Calgary or Edmonton. Like across the country, certainly you have some of the bigger cities like, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, where you have people who are a bit more likely to cycle or take public transportation. But, even in those cities, like driving is still very, very common.
Yeah. And I'd be curious to know, I don't know how far to take it or how far to look ahead, whether it would be 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or what have you, 50 years if we want to start talking about, sort of really big long-term vision type stuff. But I'd be curious to know what trends will look like in the context of vehicle ownership, whether it's self-driving cars and then, car services, maybe like sort of a whole new take on Uber that might not have drivers or whatever. I wonder what impact that might have on, car dealerships. Like I'd be curious to know. Have you put much thought into that?
Absolutely. It's something I think about a lot. And I think that, the reality is that there's many different paths that this can take when we think about the future and where this is going to go and which technologies are going to be involved with it. Like if we were thinking about what was being promised to us 10 years ago, the tech industry was saying that self-driving cars are just going to take a few years. By the end of the decade, they were going to kind of start becoming ubiquitous and be readily available in our cities. And that is really not what has happened. And a lot of these companies started to admit that in 2018, when I don't know if people remember, but there was this Uber test vehicle in Arizona that killed a pedestrian. And it was kind of, the first time that one of these vehicles had really killed somebody. And it caused a lot of reassessment, not just within the public and the media, but the industry started coming out and saying, okay, actually, these vehicles and this technology is going to take a lot longer than we previously predicted to actually be realized. And, it might never kind of reach that state where, it can handle any weather condition, any road condition, anything that you throw at it, and the human will never have to intervene. So I think we've seen a bit of a reassessment on that. I think I would say, like, when we look forward, obviously we're making this transition to electric vehicles right now. And I think that is going to be quite important in defining as to like what happens into the future. And if we're looking at like societies like Canada or the United States, we're still going to have quite a bit of car ownership into the future. But I think one thing we need to recognize is that we have an over-dependence on cars right now, and that's causing a lot of our problems. And if we started to make some investments into public transportation, into cycling networks to give people some more options, then I think we could start to address some of these issues that we're having.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Paris Marx, host of the Tech Won't Save Us podcast, a New York Times recommended podcast, and author of Road to Nowhere, What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About Transportation. Paris, it's been, we talked yesterday to author John Valiant. His new book, Fire Weather, is absolutely, he blew our mind with his take on the future of fire and humankind's relationship with fire. We can't ignore right now, we've been grateful for rain over the past number of days, and obviously the hard work of hundreds of wildland firefighters, but, a great portion of our home province of Alberta, Nova Scotia, obviously some of the United States and other parts of the world are experiencing wildfire with intensity like haven't seen in a while, and growing and rising intensity. It's sort of becoming, part of our vernacular now. We talk about fire season and almost just brush it off. It's almost the way that we're reconciling some of the haze that sticks around our cities in some circumstances for multiple days or even weeks. What's your angle on wildfire and the role that climate change is playing in public conversations that we either are or maybe aren't having?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge topic, and it's really shocking to see like some of the images that have come out of Alberta in the past, number of weeks, right? I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador, of course, not somewhere that you associate with wildfires very often, but even last year we had our worst wildfires in 60 years. So this is something that's really hitting the whole country. And I think that when we look at, the conversations that we're having around this, oftentimes when we look at our political leaders, they talk a lot about kind of the technologies that are going to get us through this and that are going to make this transition easier. But I think that we need to start having a bit more of an honest conversation. And I know it's a difficult conversation, especially in places like Alberta and, to be honest, Newfoundland and Labrador that are very dependent on oil and gas, production and revenues from that for their provincial budgets and their economies. But I think we need to recognize that this is a transition that's going to take a little while. But if we don't start it now, then we're going to be really behind when we need to, really start making these changes. And, we're seeing these wildfires now, and we're seeing these increases in natural disasters like the flooding that we saw in BC. What was that, a year or two ago? We're seeing more and more of these real impacts. And this is just at 1.1 degrees of warming, right? That's happening kind of around the world. And right now we're looking like we're going to breach 1.5, maybe even 2 degrees of warming in the years to come. And that means that every time that kind of global temperature increases, these natural disasters, not just in Canada, but around the world, are going to get worse. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't take that action today, if we don't start making those reductions, then the impact of this is just going to be worse and worse in the years to come, unfortunately.
We've got a community like, I guess about, how far is Edson, Johnny? Like 90 minutes west of us, something
about
like
90.
that, on the way to Jasper. Edson has been basically declared a state of emergency that's just basically remained. Half of it due to wildfire and half of it due to flood. I mean, it's just absolutely, this community is just, not to say that there aren't resilient people there, but it's just been absolutely brutal right now. Coming up in just a second, Paris, you've talked about it a little bit, but if tech won't save us, what will? Well, we're talking to Paris Marx, the author of Road to Nowhere. You can check out the book if you're not listening to this live. As a matter of fact, if you're watching this later, you'll be able to link directly to Paris's book and the upcoming event in Edmonton in the show notes. Back to Paris Marx in just a quick second, but our friends at Friesen Brothers wanted to let you know that they're very proud to be sponsoring Edmonton Veg Fest. That's taking place on June 24th at Borden Park in our home city of Edmonton from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Despite the fact that Friesen Brothers is probably most well known for its roots as a butcher shop, established way back in 1955, Friesen Brothers actively supports the growth of veganism in both the industry and their company. And as part of their involvement at Veg Fest, they're going to be featuring a vegan pepperoni pizza, also known as the Vegan Big Berta. John Hicks, you have had a chance to try this vegan pepperoni pizza.
I did. It was absolutely incredible. Their local, is it the produce?
Their produce manager. Yeah,
came by and gave us a couple. You had it too? You took one home?
Fantastic.
Incredible. And VegFest is going to be an incredible event. I'm, of course, going to be out there DJing, emceeing. We got our friend Jordan Wilkie, leader of the Green Party, going to come speak. A number of other activists talking about climate change, wildfires, as well as how we can eat healthier, eat greener, veganism, etc. But it's going to be a great day. And a big thing they wanted me to tell you to mention, dogs allowed.
Oh, it's dog friendly.
Dogs allowed in Borden Park.
There you go. Awesome. You're going to have some dogs looking for some of that vegan pepperoni.
They've got plant-based dog treats and everything. So bring your pups out with them.
Good stuff. Johnny's going to be out there. Of course, the straw that stirs the drink at parties like this. You can learn more about what's going on at friesen.com/vegan. We're talking a lot about climate change. We're talking about where industry is going to go. I'm curious to know what Paris Marx is going to say will save us. That in just a second. But I'll tell you, one of the companies that is absolutely leading the charge when it comes to intelligent design, spatial design, bringing outdoor spaces to life. I mean, I love the ethos behind Eden Landscaping. You can check him out online at landscapeedmonton.ca. We've had conversations with Mike, who's owned and operated this business for more than 20 years. I love, he says, more and more people are they're doing what they can to bring in pollinators into their yards. They're bringing back more native plants and grasses. People are returning to the roots when it comes to their landscape design, and this is a trend that's really exciting to see. If it's about time that you transform your outdoor space, front yard, backyard, or wherever, take 2 seconds to browse the portfolio today at landscapeedmonton.ca. And we wanted to give a big shout out to our friend Jake Kubisky. He's the CEO of Kubi Renewable Energy. Jake has been, you know what? He's the Alberta finalist for the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year.
All right.
How amazing is that as a national honor? Kubi Renewable Energy also proud to be sponsoring our Real Talk Golf Classic that goes tomorrow at the Ranch Golf and Country Club. Kubi Renewable Energy right now is hiring, looking for solar installers. If you're either an apprentice or you've got your ticket and you're looking to work in Alberta, Northwest Territories, Saskatchewan, BC, if you're looking to help Canada advance its sustainable energy goals, why not kickstart your career today by visiting kubienergy.ca. We're hanging out with tech critic Paris Marx, author of The Road to Nowhere, a podcaster behind Tech Won't Save Us, an event coming up in the city of Edmonton. We'll tell you more about that in just a second. So, Paris, you've had a second to think about it. If tech won't, what will save us?
It's a big question, right? And I think tech is always part of it. You know, it's never out of the equation. But I think that ultimately we need to think about like who is actually delivering, you know, these significant benefits. Who is actually going to make the world a better place? And it's not technology that ultimately solves our problems. We can use technology to do that, but these are ultimately political decisions, and they come from, you know, I guess politicians who can think about, you know, how things can be better and try to move that forward. But ultimately, it's people organizing in order to try to make these kinds of changes in our communities, to try to push politicians and governments to do things differently. And also, you know, I think one of the things that's been really inspiring when you look at the tech space recently is to see a lot of workers kind of organizing and pushing for change within those companies to try to get them to, you know, take some actions that are a bit more favorable that we would want to be seeing.
Are you paying much attention? I saw your most recent episode of your pod, and it looked to me like and I'm gonna be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. Crypto's final boss fight. People can check out techwon'tsave.us. What's your take on? And I don't like to say crypto because it's just such a broad. It's like saying what's your take on tech? What's your take on Bitcoin? What's your take on like Ethereum? What are you? Does your cynicism include the future of finance?
It absolutely does. Yeah. So I was not a big fan of, you know, the crypto industry when it was having kind of its big moment in the past couple of years. You know, you saw a real kind of explosion through 2020, 2021, and then the steam really started to come out of that bubble through 2022. We saw a lot of collapses, you know, especially leading up to FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, which many people probably saw in the news. And more recently, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States filed lawsuits against Binance, which is the largest kind of international crypto exchange, and Coinbase, which is the largest exchange in the United States, essentially saying that they are kind of in violation of U.S. securities laws. And so I think the big thing about crypto is it really promised this emancipatory future delivered to us by technology, right? It recognized, you know, as a lot of these tech products do, that there was a serious problem in this case, the financial industry, where there's a lot of inequity in access to financial products, where there's a lot of general inequality in our society. And they said that by adopting cryptocurrencies, we could address this problem, right? And I think ultimately when we look at this, we know that, you know, just introducing some cryptocurrencies is not how we're going to solve this. We saw, of course, a lot of people buy into this hype as the crypto industry was really exploding. And then as this really collapsed, a lot of those people lost a lot of money, right? Especially people who were brought in, you know, with the promises that they were going to be able to make a lot of money by putting their money into crypto. And so I think ultimately, if we want to solve problems in the financial system, it's not something that's going to happen through cryptocurrencies. It's going to happen through, you know, proper regulation on banks, maybe thinking about public banking, how we increase people's access to banking services and reducing the fees that they pay, and all these sorts of questions, right? Very political questions that are not going to come from, cryptocurrencies and things like that.
Yeah, I don't want to get too out of my depth in talking about this because to be honest, my level of understanding is I'm in the shallow end of the pool. Let's put it that way. But I do know that those that are bullish on Bitcoin in particular, I mean, the Wall Street Journal reporting on this just today, the headline, Bitcoin Bonanza on tap. If BlackRock, which is, I mean, I think it's the world's big, BlackRock manages trillions of dollars, I think. But they're looking for an ETF. They've applied for an ETF, and they're saying that if this happens, if it's approved, and I think that BlackRock its record on these applications is like 575 yays and 1 nay. I mean, people are saying if anybody can do it, it's BlackRock. And they're expecting that this could be a real bump. And anybody that holds a little Bitcoin, anybody that pays attention to it knows that there's always it's almost cyclical, the big stories, the headlines, the what if. It could go here. It could be $100,000 by the end of next year. It could be $300,000 by the end of next. And sometimes the bumps work and sometimes they don't. I wonder what the public appetite looks like or the endurance of people's interest in it. If it truly is going to be a significant player in the future, I understand why people would be intrigued by this. I look around me, and this is just anecdotal. I mean, this certainly isn't that to a great degree. The average citizen seems to be losing interest, where I think that there was maybe a little bit more interest in it a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. As the prices of all of these like crypto tokens was really taking off a few years ago, you could see why people were interested. The media was covering it a lot. There was the question of, should I put some money in it to see if it's going to take off? I think that the real kind of issue with crypto, as we think of it like as an investment kind of asset, is when we think about stocks and when we think about these other financial products, usually there's something like there's a core business that is, still at the base of it, right? That is kind of producing some kind of product or service that makes some money. There's a real business there. With cryptocurrencies, there's really like nothing tied to it. It's pure speculation. And that is really what drives and the kind of price of these things, the ups and downs and where it tends to go. And I think that is really kind of unreliable when we think about that as an investment asset, as something that people are going to want to reliably put money into. There were some really devastating stories that came out of the collapse through 2022 as a lot of these projects and major kind of crypto tokens were really plummeting in value. People who bought in, who put a lot of their life savings into it, believing, what the crypto people were saying. And then, there were stories about people considering suicide because they lost so much money, like, really considering how like they were losing their homes and all these sorts of things, like really devastating stories, because I would argue they were misled about the potential of these things. And that's not to say that crypto is going to be completely gone into the future. I think Bitcoin, will stick around for a while to come, but even that, has a serious environmental impact because of all the computation that's required just to process transactions.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, and Paris, we're grateful for your time. Paris Marx joining us. If you're just tuning in on the live streaming Mixler audio app presented by California Closets, I can't ask you, or I can't let you go without asking you about AI. And I'm curious to know for your take. We talked to Frances Haugen on Monday, the Facebook whistleblower, and she's the author of The Power of One. Really interesting perspective. I mean, she worked at Google, Pinterest, Yelp. Like, she worked at all these giants, right? And she's got an amazing perspective. This Harvard MBA, I don't think she's even 40 yet. Like, unbelievable what she's accomplishing. But she really was, and she's not an alarmist. Like, when you talk to her, she's very practical. She's very research. I mean, she's the whole thing she blew the whistle on with the Wall Street Journal and to the SEC was like tens of thousands of pages worth of documents of findings and research that Facebook in particular, Meta now, knows about. I mean, she's pointing to evidence. She's pointing to facts. And so it's a really compelling presentation on in particular, how AI and how social media platforms, algorithms are impacting the mental health of young people. It's not limited to young people, that's for sure. I mean, I guarantee you, I have an unhealthy relationship with social media, like 100%. I've talking about it, acknowledging it is probably the first step. But how are you approaching this from the context of where your expertise lies and what you make your living talking about?
Yeah, I think we all have that kind of unhealthy relationship with social media, unfortunately. But I think when we look at AI in particular, it's been really fascinating to see how quickly this has kind of exploded onto the scene in the past couple, in the past like 6 months or so, I guess, really, right? And I think, one of the things that really stands out to me in watching this boom happen, in watching all of the hype explode, is that what we really saw was the tech industry was facing a really difficult moment, right? We saw the implosion of the crypto bubble. We saw, the metaverse not really getting very much interest. We saw interest rates rising, and the tech industry kind of had a business model that was based on, needing access to cheap capital through low interest rates for the past 10 or 15 years, right, since the last recession. And so then what we saw was, they needed something to kind of get more interest, to kind of get more investment flowing into this industry. And then AI comes along as kind of the next savior. And I think that when we look at the narratives that a lot of these companies and a lot of these founders are putting out, I don't think we should buy into it very much. We're hearing a lot of concerns and worries about AI kind of taking over the world and being a threat to humanity and all this sort of stuff. And I think that that's really overblown. I don't think that that is the real concern with these things. I think that the real concern, and potentially going back to what you were talking about with Frances Haugen, is really just how kind of it can be used to increase these existing problems that we see in technology. So it can increase inequities. You can have these facial recognition systems that are really discriminatory against, people of color and stuff like that. I think that these are the real risks that come with these systems, but these founders are kind of distracting us from those things because, if they can shape the regulations by making these really huge claims, then it's of real benefit to them, because it means that their companies are, they're going to shape the regulation, so it benefits their companies, basically.
We didn't spend too much time talking about it today, but we'll let our audience, let the Real Talkers know that you've done a ton of work explaining how tech is inherently political. And I think probably the best place to point people is to your website, parismarx.com. Obviously, they can follow you on Twitter. They can subscribe to your podcast, Tech Won't Save Us. And, of course, they can check out your new book, The Road to Nowhere, as well. And if you're watching or listening to this and you happen to be anywhere near the Metro Edmonton region, you can come hang out with Paris. This is an event, I believe, presented by, it sure looks like it is. It's Michael Jans bringing you in, isn't it, Paris, the city councilor?
That's right, yep.
Yeah, michaeljans.ca/ParisMarx. It's an evening at the fabulous Cafe. Have you been there before, this roastery?
I haven't, no.
Oh, my gosh. It's so cool. Such a great vibe there. It's coming up on Saturday night, 6 o'clock. Again, you can learn more about sending your RSVP by checking out our show notes. Paris, it's been a real pleasure. You're a really easy person to talk to, and I appreciate your perspective. And I think sometimes we need a wake-up call, and we endeavor to have them every once in a while on the show. So thanks for delivering.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Great to speak with you.
Yeah, you as well. That's Paris Marx. Did Paris say anything that is like altering or is going to stick with you and change the way that you think about tech and future and transportation?
I think we need more guests like Paris on, because I agree with everything he said. Like
Everything.
right off the hop when he's talking about the goggles being ridiculous. I said this as soon as it came out, and I said the same thing about the metaverse. I mean, it's too soon, and the same thing with the self-driving cars. Like, we want things so bad, and we try and push them out so quick, and they don't work, and we're not ready for them. People aren't ready to just, like, they had the picture on the Google, the Apple goggles of the woman who just puts this, like, snowboard goggles on a plane and just zones. Like, nobody's going to do that.
I'm going to do that. That sounds perfect. I don't have to talk to anybody.
But for $4,000, I mean, we're just not there yet. And we were talking about how, like, my envision of the future with stuff like that was, like, smaller. Like when Google Glass came out, and I know that was a complete failure, but I figured that's what it was going to be. A microchip-sized piece of glass or something that goes over your glasses. And I would love to get a notification in the side of my left eye that said, an important email or a text from the wife.
You're surrounded
or whoever.
by...
But these... We're just put these Google goggles. I mean,
are we gonna?
They'll protect you from snow, but the Apple goggles. I mean, but I don't think they're going to be in everyone's home right away. I mean, we just got 4K, 6K. Now they're talking about 10K flat screens. Now you're going to bring in everyone's wearing $4,000 goggles. It just doesn't make sense.
There are clips though. I think of like Good Morning America or like the shows back in the early 90s or the late 80s where the hosts are they're sitting on the couch drinking their coffee, like either opening or closing it, and they're like, it's called email. Will it ever replace the letter carrier coming in? And they're all laughing and snickering. It's called, and then they're talking. I think there's one in particular where the hosts are like, tell us about this internet. What is this World Wide Web? And they're all laughing and snickering. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I try to think yesterday. I don't know if we want to tell people this because it's kind of it's a flex, but it's also embarrassing. But you and I, because we were inventorying our space for our insurance yesterday.
Yeah.
We're tallying up the number of screens in here.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of shocking.
22.
There's 22 screens in the Real Talk studio.
Including our phones, so actually 20.
So 20. And we wonder, I wonder if we were to replace all of them, if we just had a nice clean setup. It's clean, but you know what I'm saying. No screens anywhere, but you just put on your Apple Vision Pros to get your work done. If that might be, think you could have like a nice breakfast spread in front of you. You could have a melon platter instead of all those screens.
But it was the same thing with the Hyperloop. Everyone was super excited about that super fast train that could get you from here to there in 0 to 60 and this and blah blah. And we're just not there yet. And the metaverse as well. The metaverse is something that I'm really interested in. I think it's a great. I think it could be good and bad. I think people could get sucked in and, literally they were like, hey, we're all going to live in there and we're going to work in there and you can open shops in the metaverse. And I'm like, no one's ready for that yet. Like COVID just ended. We're excited to be out in the world again.
That's true.
So I think there is a future for all of these things, but I think we just need to be a little slower because nowadays everyone wants everything. As soon as they hear about we can have this, they want it right away. And we need to integrate it slowly because even when all these things come out, the metaverse and hyperloops and self-driving cars and, virtual reality goggles and AI, there's still going to be people who are like, great, but I still like the real world.
100%. There's, I picked up a paper copy of the Globe and Mail. We subscribed to the digital version. But I was, in transit over the weekend. I picked up a paper copy of the Globe, and I kind of got a kick out of it. But is that nostalgia? It's probably nostalgia because it wasn't convenient sitting on the plane, like unfolding all the sections, and But I mean, kind of took.
But
me
you
back
like
a little
reading
bit.
the newspaper still, is what you're saying.
I do. I like this comment from Final Buzzer on the live chat who says tech isn't bad. It's progress, and I don't think even Paris would say tech is not inherently good or bad. Tech is a thing. It's not inherently good or bad. I mean, is the technology? I mean, I don't even know if this is going to make sense, but is the technology behind a nuclear bomb good or bad? No, it's the science. It's the physics. It's not good or bad. It's the application of it that makes it good or bad. Anyway, to finish, Final Buzzer is going to be like, you going to finish my comment? Tech isn't bad. It's progress. Just consider that accelerated tech is something to be wary of. I think that's a measured assessment.
100%.
I like that assessment.
Final Buzzer also said COVID ended. I didn't mean COVID ended. I just meant we're coming out of we're coming out of a pandemic.
I get why some people push back when people talking about now that we're out of COVID. And now
we should actually
because. I mean, technically we're not, but I mean, the World Health Organization and others have declared the pandemic. It's now
AHS
this
week. You don't have to wear masks in hospitals or retirement communities anymore, and not everyone's happy about it. But I mean, we're moving forward, is what I meant. I didn't mean COVID has
kind of wonder if
disappeared.
Maybe at one point, I bet if you would have asked us, like, when did mask mandates start getting lifted? Like it was like the best summer ever. It was right around that time people started. I'm saying that cynically, but
Jason Kenney's Hot Boy Summer.
Exactly. When masks were the thing, and I'm not being glib, but you remember when everybody had like their own collection? I had like in my California closet.
I still have one right in my backpack.
I had a drawer with like all different colors of masks, all different. I mean, everybody had them, right? You wear the N95, you're going here. You wear the cloth or temporary, blah blah blah. At that point, when it was kind of normalized, people got used to it, right? You did get used to it. Most people did. If you would have then floated the idea or speculated around whether or not hospitals or medical facilities would just keep mask policies in place,
I figured they would
permanently. I'm surprised that they haven't, to be honest with you.
I heard it on the radio too, and I was pretty surprised as well. But I keep a mask in my backpack just because you never know. Like you might go to someone's home or a business and they're like, hey, I'm sick, put on a mask. The other thing, yesterday I was doing a run through for Veg Fest at the venue, at the location. And there was one of the people who's organizing it is deaf. And I didn't even know till the end because she wasn't born deaf. She was reading lips very well. But she was like talking about COVID and how masks were like, she was like, I understand people's health, but it was an absolute nightmare for me.
Wow.
It's hard enough reading lips. But she's like, you think my world was silent before? And she's talking to me saying this. It was absolutely a nightmare because everyone was mute. I couldn't see what people were saying. I got anxiety from it. So Again,
That's really
good and
interesting.
bad with the mask going away. But yeah, I was really surprised they took him out of hospitals and retirement homes this week.
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of thought that, it just I to a certain degree, maybe retirement. I guess I see those differently.
But in a
There's always
hospital,
gonna
you'd think
nuance.
they'd be for
in hospitals,
forever.
You kind of just think that that's kind of just the way it would go, right? Hey, so it's National Indigenous Peoples Day, and in just a second, we're going to take you out to Jasper and let you know what's going on out there today because they've got a wonderful celebration underway. But did you see this? Something caught our eye in the chat just a little while ago, just a few moments ago. And by the way, we're going to be talking about the 10th anniversary of the Southern Alberta floods coming up in a few minutes. But one of our regulars, Sharon Morin, who has, as a matter of fact, been on the show before, just a fabulous human being with just an incredible heart for public service and for the people all around her, is telling us in the live chat that Canada Post has just released a stamp.
Oh yeah, I saw
with
this.
her mom's face
I
on with her
actually have,
mom.
Here it is, right here.
Look at this. This is absolutely beautiful. So this is a stamp celebrating the life and legacy of Thelma Shalafu, and so we did a bit of quick. We had our team just do a quick bit of research on the fly here because we want to celebrate this. This is absolutely amazing. This is a Real Talker's mom celebrated. And honored. I mean, getting a stamp, a postage stamp? Are you kidding me? Like, how cool is that?
It's pretty amazing.
So Thelma was born in Calgary back in 1929, one of 5 children. Her dad, Paul Villeneuve, was a residential school survivor and a veteran of the First World War. She studied at Lethbridge Community College and then went on to SAIT. Now Polytechnic, known as a social justice activist, a politician, an active figure in the Métis community. You know, there are more Métis people in Alberta than in any other Canadian province or territory. She co-founded the Slave Lake Friendship Center that helps women struggling with alcoholism and domestic abuse. She championed the teaching of Cree in northern schools. She was the first woman to host a weekly show on Peace River CKYL radio. The show is called Smoke Signals from the Peace, and she was the co-producer of a program called Our Native Heritage. She was a floral designer, a business owner. She was appointed to the Canadian Senate back in 1997, making her the first Indigenous woman and the 4th Métis person to serve in the Canadian Senate. She held the position until 2004 when she retired and returned to Alberta. At that point, in 2004, the Alberta Venture magazine ranked her pretty high, Johnny, number 8 on their list of the 50 greatest Albertans.
Wow.
Can you imagine being named on a list in the top 10 of the greatest? Are you kidding me?
No, I can't.
After Thelma's retirement,
Definitely can't.
plebs like us cannot wrap our minds around it. She founded the Michif Cultural and Resource Institute and was the first woman to receive the National Aboriginal Achievement Award, known today as the Inspire Award. She passed away, surrounded by family, in 2017. The year later, the Edmonton Public School Board of Trustees voted to name the new school in Larkspur the Thelma Shalafu School. How cool is that?
Really cool.
So, Sharon, shout out to you and your family. What a celebration this must be in honor of your mom. Absolutely incredible. It is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and we wanted to let you know. I mean, every Wednesday we check in with our friends out in Jasper National Park. It's MyJasper Memories, presented by our friends at Tourism Jasper. And today, June 21st, a very special opportunity for you to experience some of the Indigenous history and culture in that most beautiful part of the Canadian Rockies. Jasper is hosting today its annual Indigenous Peoples Day celebration with a full schedule of events in Robson Park. The Jasper Indigenous Forum comprises more than 20 nations with traditional ties to the area, and it spans 6 different language groups. This year, Jasper National Park is honored to partner with Simpcw, its People of the River, as hosts of the National Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. Everybody is welcome to come out. Don't miss this chance to celebrate the storytelling, the songs, the dances, and learn from Indigenous people that have gathered and called this region home for millennia. The day kicks off around 9:30. So for those of you listening live, I mean, I'm envisioning a few people dropping everything and heading out to Jasper National Park right now. They'll kick it off with a pipe ceremony and a prayer. And then from 11 to 4 today, performances of storytelling, songs, dances, and drumming will take the stage, They've also got an Indigenous artisan market, a ton of cultural knowledge workshops. You can learn about plant medicines, traditional languages, fishing methods, and demonstrations with flint arrowheads. You can learn more via the web link. It's going to be in our show notes. It's at parks.canada.ca for National Indigenous Peoples Day in Jasper National Park. To make it easy for you, we've also posted the link on our official Real Talk RJ Instagram and Twitter accounts earlier this morning to make it nice and easy for you as we celebrate and observe National Indigenous Peoples Day on this June 21st. Well, we've been recognizing through the week the 10-year anniversary of the Southern Alberta floods. It's either probably, if you're like me, hard to believe that it's already been 10 years, or it feels like a lifetime ago when communities in and around Calgary, High River, of course, who will forget some of the devastation in central Alberta, Banff and Kananaskis was certainly not spared, and we could name 100 more communities as well. 100,000 people displaced, 5 people killed directly due to those floods, and more than $5 billion in damage. What do we know 10 years later about how those floods and our response to those floods shaped communities across Alberta, in particular Calgary? 2 researchers, disaster researchers out of Mount Royal University, have been putting a lot of time into this, and we're grateful to welcome them to the show. Dr. Caroline McDonald-Harker is a professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Mount Royal University. Expertise in disasters, families, trauma, and resilience, with a specific focus on the social, ecological factors that facilitate and support recovery. Dr. Tim Haney is a sociologist of disasters, the environment in cities. He was down in New Orleans, lived through Hurricane Katrina, and ever since then has been doing research on the social dynamics of floods, oil spills, hurricanes, wildfires, and pandemics. A lot of talk around this stuff this week here on the show, and we're grateful to welcome both Dr. Haney and Dr. McDonald-Harker. Caroline, maybe we'll start with you. Which side of the coin do you fall on? We'll ask both of you maybe just to just mute your speakers. We're getting some, that would be perfect. When you look back, does it feel like these floods were yesterday or a lifetime ago, now that we're observing a 10-year anniversary?
Certainly from my perspective, I do feel like it was just yesterday that these floods occurred. I think that's in large part due to the fact that disasters have continued to occur in their frequency and severity. Of course, we've had the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire 3 years after the 2013 Alberta flood. And then we've had the pandemic. Right now, we know that wildfires and floods are raging across Canada. And so I think it's very top of mind for many people. It's not like it was an isolated event that occurred. And we also know from our research findings that major disasters not only have an impact within the first few years, but some of those effects last well into 10 years and beyond. So many individuals are still impacted today and are still thinking about it.
Tim, you were living in New Orleans, is that correct? When Hurricane Katrina touched down?
I was. My partner and I lived there. We went through Katrina, were displaced by it, evacuated from it, lived in New Orleans for a full year after Katrina. So yeah, we've been through it all. Then, of course, we were living in Calgary in 2013 when the flood happened. And our sort of personal connection to it is that our oldest son was born during the flood and his birth was impacted by the flood.
Wow. Could you tell us that story?
Sure. So my partner was pregnant with our first child, and we knew that the due date was coming soon. And then we started seeing media reports and social media coverage of the flood. We were kind of hoping that she would hold out a few more days until things had kind of gotten settled a little bit. But she went into labor at during the night of the 22nd/23rd of June. At that time, a lot of the roads were closed. Like there was portions of Crowchild Trail that were closed, portions of Glenmore 16th that were closed. And so she went, I don't know that we can get to where we were planning to go to do the birth. So I'm staying here. And so I went, okay, I guess we're going to do a home birth. So our son was born at home because of the flood. and was actually named after the flood. The night before, we had watched a really stupid movie on Netflix, the movie Evan Almighty, about this guy who built an ark, kind of like a modern day Noah. And it's a Steve Carell movie. And so we named our son Evan after the flood movie. So, disasters have kind of defined our lives in a lot of different ways. Our wedding was disrupted by a powerful tornado. The same year that Katrina happened, actually. We've kind of been through it all on a personal level.
Yeah, do your friend, not to make light of it, but do your friends suggest that there might be something following you around, Tim, that there might be something going on?
Definitely. Three pretty major disaster events and a couple of near misses in there too. But we did have another kid in 2018, and that one, there was no disaster. So that was a pretty great thing.
Yeah, weird.
We were pretty nervous. Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting story to it, but it makes it all the more, I think, I don't know, ironic or funny that I'm also a disaster researcher. So it's what I do every day too. I teach about them, write about them. I guess at some point I decided if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah. Dr. McDonald-Harker, this kind of, I guess, is an obvious segue into talking about your area of expertise. I mean, the impact of disaster on families, right? And on bigger picture communities. I think that, I have my own stories around the Southern Alberta floods and how they impacted my family directly. I guarantee that thousands of people that listen to this interview will be able to say the exact same thing. How do you go about analyzing it? What angle do you take when you start looking at the impact of a natural disaster like these floods on families?
Certainly. So I look at the psychosocial impacts of disasters. So I look at how they are traumatic experiences, the mental health effect that it has. But a large part of my research also focuses on resilience capacity. So if we look at a lot of the research on disaster in the past, it has had a deficit-based focus. And so my research sort of moves beyond that and takes a strength-based approach to look at, well, what are some of these capacities that some of these children and adolescents had during the flood that helped them overcome it, that helped them move forward and also support their own communities and be catalysts for change. And, it's really interesting because when we look at a large focus of research on disaster, we tend to see that a lot of the focus is on the impacts on physical infrastructure. So the devastation to communities, to homes, to schools, to buildings, to lands. But we also know that they have long-term mental health impacts on individuals who are both directly and indirectly impacted by disasters. So we see that it often contributes to anxiety and depression and PTSD. And oftentimes these mental health effects following disaster are so profound that, as I mentioned earlier, they last much longer than the visible destruction caused by disaster, with some people still suffering effects even 10 years later.
We talked to John Valiant about this as well, and just the impact that wildfires are having on people. And he made that same point about, we talk about the Fort McMurray wildfires, but we could talk about Slave Lake. We could talk, obviously there's dozens or hundreds of examples we can talk about. Caroline, how does someone know if they're maybe still wrestling? I don't know how to put it. I guess basically if they've got PTSD, if they're still living with trauma, but maybe haven't received that as an official diagnosis, maybe they're not receiving mental health supports. What would be some of the factors that people should look for within, between their own two ears, so to speak?
I think it's important that people look at their behavioral approaches or how they've adapted. So it's normal in the immediate aftermath of a disaster to feel stressed, to feel anxious, to be worried, to constantly have fear, if you will, that another disaster is going to happen. But it's looking at beyond that. So are people able to cope, within a few weeks, within a few months? And so I always recommend that people look at their behavior and compare it to how it was prior. So are people sleeping more or less? Are people eating more or less? Are people withdrawing from activities that they once found to be very enjoyable? Are they more irritable? Is there more conflict in their relationships? And paying attention to one's behavior and recognizing what are the stressful factors contributing to it. And I always recommend that people reach out sooner rather than later, because what we tend to see in a disaster context is that there are a lot of supports within the first year to 3 years. 1 to 3 years is usually what we see. And oftentimes when people actually realize that they're not able to overcome some of these stressors, oftentimes a lot of these resources and supports are no longer available. And I think it's important that people not just access formalized supports. There's so much hesitation to do that, where people think, oh, well, my neighbor was impacted more than I was, and maybe I don't need formalized support. But even opening up the lines of communication with family members, with other supports that you have in your community is crucial, and not feeling like your experience is not as severe as others. So I think it's important that people have those discussions, and specific to families, that parents talk with their children, that they say, how are you doing today? And that they're open and honest. And if they're struggling, that they say, hey, you know what? Mommy's having a hard time today, or it's the 10th anniversary and, I'm having a hard time dealing with it. And it's important that people are honest with those conversations with their children.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating? I mean, both of you, I'm sure, and Dr. Haney will get you to touch on this as well, have experience in this, but you think of parents and throughout history, I guess this has always been the case. You pick your decade and you'll have had, sort of the threats that humankind has faced through those decades. But you look at, as of late, parents have had to understand or try to determine the best way to talk to, young kids, tweens, teens about things that surround them, issues that they can't ignore. We talked to, when COVID sort of came about, I guess, our now almost 8-year-old would have been 5, right? And even just what we called it, right? The sickness, but the way that he would talk about the sickness, or the way that parents help their children process why maybe the flag football game is canceled on Sunday because the air quality is so poor, and why is the air quality poor, and what's happening? Or they're walking past a screen and they see the news and they see swaths of land in the boreal forest ablaze. Tim, we talk about your kids. How do you, on a personal level, navigate this? All things, including mental health, considered.
And that's a good question. So I think my kids are a little different. They've sort of grown up around continual discussions of disasters because it's a big theme in our house. But I think for us, it's been matter of fact discussions about it. Maybe not like our children don't need all the details about what goes on during a disaster, but sort of understanding the community dynamics of it, the fact that, a lot of good can come out of a lot of bad. And so we do stress those things too with them. As an example, some of the research that I did after the flood in Calgary found that people who were affected by the flood in the 26 neighborhoods of Calgary that were impacted by the flood actually were quite successful at forming new social networks and meeting their neighbors, at feeling more attached to their community than they did before the flood. And it was the people who were most severely impacted by the flood, who had the largest losses, for instance, that actually were more likely to go meet new neighbors that they didn't know before, and so on. It was these situations of need that brought people together. And so, disasters are horrible, terrible, life-changing events. And I would never want to say anything other, but there is good that can arise out of them, and communities can become stronger moving forward. So I think to talk about that with young people as well, too, as well as to tap into, this is what a lot of Carolyn's work does, to tap into their capacities for creativity and for, new ideas, because kids are really sharp and they can figure out what wasn't working about their community beforehand and what could be different going forward in a post-disaster context. So asking them for their ideas and actually taking seriously their ideas is a really great way to get kids engaged in the process and make it less traumatic and more empowering for them.
I'd be curious for both your take on this, Carolyn. Maybe we'll start with you first on your assessment of how we rebuilt, and not just technically, but with rebuilding physical structures, with developing new communities, with maybe people's individual and collective evolution on how they view the environment, climate change, sustainability. How would you assess Alberta's rebuild over the past 10 years?
Well, I think there have been efforts to mitigate future disasters, but to be quite frank, I think a lot more needs to be done. We still tend to see communities and builders who are building homes close to floodplains, and I think that is disastrous. it's only contributing to the problem later on. But I always recommend that individual households take a look at what they're doing. So while we can't control nature and weather, there's certainly some things that we do have control over and we can do from our end. And that is to ensure that we ourselves are prepared. So people should ensure that their homes are secured and protected, that they have evacuation plans in place, that they have discussed with their families an emergency plan, that they have 72-hour emergency kits and food storage and water supply. And these are all things that people have control over. And when people are prepared, it does reduce stress. And it's crucial to plan for catastrophic events like disasters because they are going to continue to increase with climate change. And so while we may not be able to control what our province is doing or our communities, I think that people need to be more aware. If you're looking to purchase a home or build a home, that you look, where is that home located? So a lot of this information is still not transparent and it's putting residents at risk. And that's something that we need to take seriously, that we have not fully done to the best of our capacity.
Tim, as soon as you saw Caroline say they're not transparent, you just had this physical reaction. Like, it looks like you just absolutely agree 100% very strongly.
So yes, we have these regulatory flood maps. And so if you buy a home, you can know if you're in the floodway or the flood fringe area, if you're in a flood prone area. But a lot of people don't understand what that actually means. So as part of my research projects, I've talked to Calgarians about flood risk. And I remember talking with a couple that had just bought a lot that had flooded during the 2013 flood. And like a year after, they were planning on building their dream home on this lot.
Right.
And I was trying to get at the sort of thought process behind that. And they said to me, well, they told us that the Calgary flood was a 1 in 100 year flood. So we should be good for 99 more years.
Right.
No, that is not how the logic works. But people don't always understand what that means. The other thing is the maps are based upon the past, upon how often an area has flooded and how severely in the past. So it's making the assumption that that's going to be true going forward. And the truth is, we, like Carolyn mentioned, climate change, we don't really know that. So could these events become more common going forward? And so as a result, I would be really hesitant to buy a home in a flood prone area of the city. But like Carolyn mentioned, again, we continue to approve building permits in flood fringe areas. And this is where it really runs into the issue of densification, that there's this focus in Calgary on densifying existing neighborhoods. Those are often neighborhoods that are near the city's rivers, the Bow and Elbow River. And so when we're densifying those neighborhoods, we're putting more people closer to the hazards. I'm not a big fan of sprawl and building far out either. But I think there have to be discussions about what kind of building is prudent and safe and wise for our city to do. But the reality is builders and developers can make a ton of money building homes near hazards, near flood prone areas. So,
yeah, it's wild. We were talking to John Valiant yesterday, a fire weather author, and he was pointing out to us, I think it's, who is it? State Farm, I think, Johnny, right? The insurance giant.
And Allstate.
And Allstate as well, right? They will not insure. They're not issuing new policies in California for fire. Like, they just forget about they're too expensive. They're just not available.
No.
That's hard to wrap your mind around on a mortgaged property.
And the insurance piece is a piece that I think didn't get talked about enough during the 2013 flood. At that time, overland flooding was just not insurable in Canada. You could not get overland flooding protection. So these are uninsured losses for the most part that people sustained in 2013. That product became a little more available in Canada starting in about 2015, but it tends to be expensive. It tends to be hard to access. And as a result, most Canadians who live in flood-prone areas do not have flood insurance. They're not any more protected now than they were in 2013. And so insurers are, like you pointed out, increasingly worried about insuring people who live near these hazards. And so this is a big challenge. It means a lot of people are left unprotected. And as we know, our wealth tends to be tied up in the homes that we purchase. So people's wealth is at risk. Their livelihoods are at risk as a result of these disasters and hazards.
We're talking to that was Dr. Tim Haney, and also joined by his colleague Dr. Carolyn McDonald-Harker, both of them professors and disaster researchers out of Mount Royal University in Calgary. They've been spending a ton of time looking into the longer term impacts of disaster, but in particular the southern Alberta floods. Before we thank the two of you for your time, over the next couple of weeks, this week in particular, people will be seeing, even right here on this show, footage. They'll be reminded of where they were or how their family was impacted by this. And we hope and we're confident that your appearance on this show will prompt some thinking and prompt some introspection with people. What's one thing, I want to give you both this assignment, Caroline, maybe you first, that you think people would benefit from thinking about? Give us an assignment while we're riding our bike this weekend or walking our dog or maybe sitting down by the river 10 years after these devastating natural disasters.
I think it's important for us to reflect on what have we learned and where do we go from here? And as Dr. Haney said, the disruption caused by the flood wasn't all negative. My research found that besides getting to know their neighbors and seeing each other more frequently as they came out in droves to help each other, many families said that experiencing the flood helped them to reassess their priorities and what they valued most in their life. They had spent their whole life working towards purchasing and accumulating material items, and in an instant, that was all gone. So it really caused them to pause and reflect on their life and recognize that things like family and relationships and community are much more important than material items. And that's something that I heard time and time again in my research with families. And so I challenge people to think about what are some of the things that they learned and what are their priorities moving forward, and what are their goals and plans? Because in a moment, like we see with disasters, a lot of the things that we once prioritized are no longer a priority. So thinking about what really matters.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate that. And I saw a comment in our live chat. Somebody said emergency preparedness. I can't remember the exact phrase, but they said something like, basically there's like a sort of a fine line between being ready and getting into tinfoil hat territory. I don't know. I was thinking about like really practical stuff. I was thinking about, we're spending a lot of time talking about wildfires as well. I mean, the two of you, of course, here mostly talking about floods, but I think about those folks in Fort McMurray. Like, what about I'm sure that this has to have been the case for a lot of people. The people that were rolling around with like an eighth of a tank of fuel in their minivan that like weren't ready to go. People that just didn't have a bag packed, which would, for all intents and purposes, be most people in a situation like that. The evacuation order comes fast. I mean, that fire blew in fast. You could say the same thing about a lot of these floods. It caught a lot of people off guard. I mean, we'll all remember the firefighters and search and rescue folks helping people with rowboats and Zodiacs. And I mean, it happens fast. I think even from like a basic emergency preparedness standpoint, like I am not prepared at all. I mean, I'm not one of those people that always has their fuel tank at the top. I mean, that's just one example out of a million, though. Tim, has that impacted? I mean, has your research and your personal experience, has that impacted like your everyday life? Like how much? Assuming you're driving, maybe you're not, but how much gas is in your car right now if you do drive?
Oh, 100%, and it's full. And it always is. And so my partner and I, having gone through all these disasters we've gone through, we're definitely verging on prepper territory.
Yeah.
So we stockpile food. We've got the 72-hour kit that Carolyn mentioned. We've got one in our vehicle as well. So that stuff is always with us. We're always thinking about disasters and risk, for better or worse. But I don't think that people need to take it to that extreme, but if you want to have a 72-hour kit, as everybody should, there's organizations like the Calgary Emergency Management Agency in the city of Calgary, the Alberta Emergency Management Agency provincially, and they have on their websites documents that you can use to assemble what you would need. So the medicines that you would need, the pet supplies that you would need, how much water you would need, et cetera, to be able to shelter in place for 72 hours during one of these events. So if you can afford it, and not everybody can afford to assemble all these things, if you can afford it and have the means, it's a great thing to do, to have some readiness at an individual or household level.
That's Dr. Tim Haney. We've also been hearing from Dr. Carolyn McDonald-Harker, both of them sociology professors, disaster researchers out of Mount Royal University in Calgary. Thank you so much to both of you for your time and sharing your expertise with us. You've hit on angles that a lot of us, myself included, really, quite frankly, haven't considered. And I really appreciate you taking the conversation there. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you can link to both of the professors' work by checking out the show notes on the podcast or on YouTube, however you're getting Real Talk. Johnny, I think I know you relatively well, but I do not know I do not know. Sometimes I don't know. I don't know where you land on keeping your fuel tank topped up. Are you like stretch it 10 more kilometers to the, to get it into the red zone?
I used to be like, okay, it's empty, let's fill it up. But after meeting my partner and now we're married, she is exactly. I think she's more like Tim.
Okay.
So we have a go bag now.
You do really?
Well, we were in Kelowna during the fires, and that was something that kind of startled me because I'd always heard. Living in Alberta, you know about the wildfires, you see the smoke, it's never in the city. It's never in Edmonton and surrounding area. Sometimes on the outskirts, but you never see it up close. And in Kelowna, we could see it from our apartment. It was literally, a mile away, across the way. So now we have a go bag. We've got stuff ready to go if we have to. And we have some preparedness.
We've got. Did you see this comment?
But with the gas thing, always half a tank. I fill it up now.
Yeah.
If it's at half, I fill it up.
I mean, to give you some insight into how I operate.
I did it yesterday.
I was driving a vehicle. This was last summer, but I was driving a vehicle. Realized I had to be somewhere in 20 minutes, and it was like a 20-minute drive. I had no time to stop. Realized the vehicle had like no gas in it. So I just grabbed the jerry can out of the garage that's used to fill the lawnmower, and I was like, if I run out, I run out. I mean, that's how you realize that you're just generally speaking, underprepared.
Yeah, and my partner has PTSD now from the Kelowna thing, so she's like, when I get in the car, if it's not 3/4 of a tank, and there's a go bag, and there's stuff in the car too, we've got like an emergency kit now. Yeah, so.
A lot of people I see in our live chat talking about the RCMP seizing guns was in High River. That was another interesting story. And that was one that became obviously very politically charged and for several years after the fact. A great handle here from Bunny Slippers, who's tuning in. Love it. Says, I have an EV and it's always charged. You know me, I'm open-minded to EVs, but I wonder, like not to say that gas stations are always open, because we know that they're not, and they can run out of fuel, or they can be impacted, obviously, just like any other business, by fire or flood. But EVs, charging stations, like
in Alberta, it's not that great.
You could find yourself in a real jam. I mean, you could say that the same thing about internal combustion for sure.
No, I looked this up when we were talking about it on the show. Toronto's got a ton, Vancouver as well, obviously, but Edmonton, I don't know. Like, where am I going to go if I buy an EV? Yeah. I know there's one at the IKEA. Right there on Calgary Trail, but that's about it.
Geez. These are things to think about. Where are you landing on this? I mean, what are you thinking about 10 years? I mean, we know that we have people listening. A lot of you will be listening from Eastern Canada, some of you from BC. What do you remember out of province about those southern Alberta floods? I remember driving in. I was on assignment, obviously, hosting a TV show at that time, Breakfast Television, and driving from Edmonton, getting down into Calgary, and it just blew my mind. I was arriving about 1 a.m, getting set for the next morning's show, and I'll never forget it. It was my hometown. It's where I grew up, and just seeing the devastation at that point. I mean, I think that the Saddle Dome was probably became, and Johnny, I know that here for people watching on YouTube, you're sharing some of those images. I think they were saying up to row 13 or something like that. It was full. It was like a punch bowl, just full. Remember Harvey the Hound, their mascot? They found his head floating around. It was kind of became like the symbol.
Scene, right?
It was horrific. It was like the symbol of the floods. But on a personal level, our story would be like hundreds of thousands of other people's as well.
Yeah.
My younger brothers, his wife's parents. I mean, their house was like virtually destroyed in just off Memorial Drive there in Calgary. I remember seeing photos of them. You go into the basement, right? The stairs down to the basement. The water was almost up to the main floor. In other words, the water was almost up to the ceiling of the basement. I mean, it's just wild to think about.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I just looked up the EV thing. So Alberta's got about 250 charging stations compared to Toronto, which has like 1,600.
Yeah,
so
and I don't want to turn this into like, Jesperson's saying that EVs.
No, but I'm someone who wants
like
an EV eventually,
it's
like,
a practical thing
to
think about. Yeah, I mean, you imagine if everybody's hitting the road at the same time. But also, let's be honest, we don't think it's going to happen to us.
But also, is that an Alberta pushback thing? Because they've got the lowest out of the major provinces, BC, Toronto. Quebec, or BC, Ontario, Quebec. So maybe it's an Alberta thing. Like, we don't want the EVs yet.
Yeah. Lauren pointing out that Edmonton Fire responded to the Calgary floods. Absolutely. Dennis talking about how the Calgary Zoo was really affected. That's absolutely true, Dennis.
I
You're
remember
right.
that.
Didn't one of the hippos? They said one of the hippos almost got into the Bow River.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know what.
Well, you got animals in
that.
cages. Like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm guessing, I know it's sad, but humans are the number one priority. So that was something my partner was
Wouldn't
watching
that be
too.
fascinating to get to get some? We had the Calgary Zoo's, I think it was CEO or executive, whatever his title is, on the show a while back. It was actually a fascinating interview. But imagine understanding what emergency protocol would look like at a zoo.
I'm sure they have one now.
Like what? But seriously,
then,
are you
yeah.
loading up lions and Siberian tigers and gorillas and giraffes?
But who's doing that when their families at home?
Polar
And they've
bears?
got to do the same thing. That's why we were worried about it. Yeah.
Wild. If you were me and you were about to thank some sponsors for making the show happen, you'd probably talk about Complete Care Restoration right now. I mean, it seems to make perfect sense, and I'm not trying to be a smartass about it. Complete Care Restoration, Johnny, put it this way. They're one of our valued sponsors of the Real Talk Golf Classic tomorrow. They're sending representation, but their team won't be there. Because they are all hands on deck right now.
Because of everything going on.
Because of everything going on. Because of some of the flooding and in particular the fire damage that they're helping people bounce back from. It's what they do. And quite frankly, based on what we've seen in doing business with them, it's what they do best. A team of absolute professionals. And this is a family-owned business. The ownership group in place from the moment that they founded this company more than 10 years ago. And they take every job personally. You can tell it. It's just evident in the way that they work and in the finished product. If you're experiencing the gut punch of fire damage or flood damage, number one, our thoughts are with you. Number two, do yourself a favor and check out CompleteCareRestoration.ca today. We also wanted to mention our friends at Local Environmental Services are looking to grow their footprint in Alberta and Saskatchewan right now. And one of the reasons why a lot of people are choosing local for whether it's the big roll-off bins or front-load bins, maybe you've got this time of year a project underway at home, maybe you're redoing the roof or maybe you're replacing your siding. People are going to localenvironmental.ca because they're getting better service, better prices, and this is a company that supports local causes. You can learn more about what they're doing in Edmonton and area, Regina and area, Whitecourt and area by visiting localenvironmental.ca today. Don't forget, because of our golf classic tomorrow, there's no show on Friday. You can probably guess why, and that means Trash Talk's coming up tomorrow. And if you want to get in a gripe, a rant, make sure you send it to us, talk@ryanjesperson.com before Thursday morning. That's presented by Local Environmental Services. Our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton, Sherwood Park, are going to be out there on the golf course tomorrow with their Dilly Bar shooters on the 10th tee box.
Danger, Will Robinson.
So looking forward to that. You and I will have to pass by that tee box a couple of times for those Dilly Bar shooters.
A couple.
These are presented by the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. They want to remind you that any occasion is a happy occasion with a DQ cake. Layers of celebration, that world-famous soft serve, a fudgy, crunchy, chocolatey middle. It's the perfect way to celebrate any occasion. You can check them out online, or you can go visit them in store at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. And a shout out to those of you are a talented engineer or you're just about to graduate from school, but to be honest, you know it, you're feeling it. It's time to shake things up. Maybe you need a new landscape, a new team to work with, a new challenge. Apex Automation wants to hear from you. If you're an electrical engineer, instrumentation, computer science, process, or mechanical engineer, if you're an electrician, if you're an instrument technician, their team is growing so fast right now that we can't keep track with all the field offices that they're opening up. Congratulations to members of their team that are now, of course, blazing that trail down in Houston, Texas. Apex Automation continuing to grow, putting their people ahead of their profits. And that's one of the big reasons why we recommend, if you've got the skills and you'd love to work with a team that'll help you realize your potential, you're going to want to visit apexautomation.ca today.
The skills to pay the bills.
That's how to go in there, you know?
We had a lot to talk about this week with disaster and climate change. And
heavy.
My partner was like, well, this is a heavy week.
Yeah.
And she's, of course, she's a Pisces. So,
yeah.
And she's an emote, and she's worried about the world ending.
Is she? I don't know too much about the signs, but is she like a true? If you read the definition of a Pisces, would she?
Well, she's also just a person who's very she's connected to everything. You know what I mean? She reads a sad story, she puts herself in that person. I'm the type of person.
She's empathetic.
I close the window. I'm like, I have to go to work. I don't have to think about this. She fully envelops it. But she was saying, "Wow, you've been talking about this a lot." And someone just commented, I wish we could have got to it. I know we got to go, but we haven't talked about that submersible.
Let's get, no, it's not, we don't have to go. We can do whatever the hell we want.
So
this was like, what was it, like $250,000 or something a person for these folks to get
5 people went missing.
This submersible to go see the Titanic, right? Like 2.5 miles down.
Yeah, so it's kind of a luxury voyage to go, and apparently it's right by where this Titanic wreck is, but they never made it out there. They got pings kind of halfway there. An aircraft actually heard sounds using some sort of radar or something at 30-minute intervals from the area where the sub disappeared, according to internal emails sent to DHS leadership obtained by... Actually, I'm reading this on Rolling Stone right now, but yeah, that's just crazy. But apparently they have air in this thing for about 4 days. So
in other words, they're running out of air.
This has been 2 days now.
And, well, if they're still alive. I mean, it's such a... We'll be honest, the show's called Real Talk. It's one of these things where I see...
It's horrifying.
It's horrifying.
It's a nightmare to think
But also,
about.
like, a lot of people are kind of joking about it. I don't know if they're just assuming that these folks are going to survive, or it's just one of those things where there's... A lot of people are kind of poking fun. I don't know if you saw, there's one of the billionaires on board. His son... was tweeting, and different people manage grief differently and all that kind of stuff. I'm not making a judgment call here, but his son tweeted that, my dad is on board this vessel, and I'm very worried, and they're missing. And then he tweeted a photo wearing a new Blink-182 shirt from the merch tent at the Blink-182 concert, and he was like, my dad would want me to be here, kind of idea. And number one, I thought, why are you posting that? But whatever. People deal with grief differently. But the comments, the replies to the tweet were not gracious, which is weird because usually on Twitter everybody's so kind and gentle and thoughtful. But
in a parallel universe,
they were quoting Blink-182 lyrics and all that kind of stuff.
That's
but
crazy.
that it sounds to me, and again, I'm not so familiar with the story that I feel like I can comment on it authoritatively, but it sounds to me like it's pretty basic tech, like the fact that. First of all, you're spending is it true people spend $250,000 to go down on this thing?
Yeah.
To go down to see Titanic?
Dive down is
but
about
they don't have the
$2 million.
capabilities to bring it back up or to tell where it is?
It's a very small vessel. They're using things it has a constant pinging, which is heard by radar or sonar or
But
whatever.
obviously it's not working.
And they have lights as well, but it's very small. We're talking about deep waters here. You've got the Boston Coast Guard. You've got Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. So you got Canadians and Americans working together because it's kind of in the middle. Well, not in the middle, but you know what I mean. And so
if what
they
I
haven't
read
been
is
able to
true
find
about
everything.
What I read is true about it, is it also there's no escape hatch. Even if they were to be able to rise to the surface, apparently there's something like 20 bolts on the exterior. I don't consider myself to be claustrophobic, but
launched, right?
This would be a nightmare.
So now they said they're going to employ remote. Let me just scroll back up to this. They're gonna use remote operated vehicles through partnership, these two organizations in Halifax and Boston, to possibly search for the missing submersible. But they're stating like these are deep, deep waters, and they're.
Yeah, I mean, Alberta Girl says these poor people are locked in that thing. It could be 4,000 meters below sea.
13,000 foot depth is what they were looking at.
I can't even wrap my mind around that. Like that is so. Justin says there's videos, and Justin, I mean, obviously we're just kind of shooting the shit here. I saw the same video I think that he's talking about, and I don't know if this has been verified. I'll take his word for it, but he said there's videos showing the inside of this vessel and how it works. And there's like a Logitech game controller that's used to steer the thing. He says it's not been approved by any kind of agency that says that it's safe at that depth. I've seen some commentators online. I'm not talking about Jordan 65755. I'm talking about like people that understand engineering and tech that have said with a vessel like this, the more simple the controls, the better.
100%.
I don't know, but
they're also saying that apparently there's lights that are constantly flashing on this thing. So they've got divers on the surface during the day going down as far as they can, trying to look around. But even if those divers find wreckage or this thing down there, we're talking about 13,000
yeah, divers
feet.
can never.
You have to send an underwater drone, a remote operated vehicle to even get to them and drag them up to the surface. So it's just nightmarish stuff.
Yeah. People are saying, where's James Cameron on this? In all seriousness, probably this is something that would intrigue James Cameron. Kathy says there was talk on the news this morning. There was metal fatigue at play on the vessel. Could be a real possibility that it imploded at that depth. You
a lot of pressure,
wrap your mind
down
around
there.
how much pressure would be on that vehicle down there, that vessel. I just can't even imagine that.
And I don't want to say anything, but if they aren't found, will they ever, kind of thing? Because it's a very small vehicle, right? So
yeah,
we are hoping they find something. And you've got tons of people from North America, United States, and Canada. They are focused on this every day because they know they're at the halfway point. They've only got a day and a half, 2 days.
Not to be
left
Captain
of air.
Obvious saying the dumbest things at the table, but the irony as well of going down to see Titanic and not coming back up is just also.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is a tough transition. Sometimes we're silly on the show, and sometimes we just tackle serious stuff head on. And tomorrow, it's going to be our final show of the week. Dr. Mira Nair is going to join me in studio. Not to pile on some of the emotional toll that these conversations can take, but we're approaching as well the anniversary of the Air India bombing, which is the worst terrorist incident in Canada's history by far. But Dr. Nair will argue tomorrow, and we'll get an understanding on it, why that Canada has unremembered this tragedy, that Canada has never really taken it seriously or responded in meaningful fashion. It's a conversation that you don't see a lot in mainstream news, and we are proud to be hosting it here. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode of Real Talk. In the meantime, we wanted to thank you, all of you that have joined our community in the past while. We see it. We see you signing up and subscribing to our weekly email at ryanjesperson.com. Thank you to our new Patreon supporters. Thank you to those of you that have been subscribing to our YouTube channel. That's up about 1,000 in the last few weeks. And of course to our podcast as well. It means a ton to us. We want to keep these conversations going and make sure that as many people as possible are hearing them. And we thank you for that.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer.